So welcome to The Papers, our nightly look ahead to what the newspapers are bringing us tomorrow. We're joined tonight by Sian, Griffiths, the education editor at the Sunday Times, and also by the freelance journalist Kunal Dutta. Good evening to you both. Before we go through the papers in details, let's just have a look at some of the front pages. The Sunday Express has a picture of the plane crash near the Shoreham Air Show in West Sussex, and the same picture there on the front page of The Independent. The Sunday Telegraph leads of the attempted train attack in France and says the gunman had been allowed to move across Europe despite being identified as a threat. The Mail on Sunday shows the British man who helped tackle the gunman in Paris, along with what the paper says is the Islamic State fighter Jihadi John, who's also British, of course. And the Observer says more than 40 leading economists are backing left-winger Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour leadership contest. And the former Speaker of the Commons, Betty Boothroyd, has written in the Sunday Times warning Labour will destroy itself if Jeremy Corbyn is elected. So let's start with these harrowing photos. We'll start with The Independent there. The headline on a dark banner, 7 die as plane crashes into weekend traffic. I think in some ways we know that air shows can be dangerous, particularly abroad. We've seen this happen before. I think what makes this even worse is the innocents that died on the road below as well, Sian.
Absolutely. I mean, these two papers have cleared their front page for this very dramatic photo showing the plane exploding in this fireball, billowing black smoke going up into this blue summer sky. And although there have been, this is I think the 7th disaster in the last 7 years at an air show, previous disasters have not involved civilians. I mean, the pilots have sometimes died, which is of course a tragedy, but this plane came down on the A27, hit at least 4 cars. We know that at least 7 people have died, and the police are warning there may be more. So, and you can see from the photographs just how close it is to buildings. You know, a real tragedy. And I think there will be calls now for air show safety to be tightened up. There must be. That
picture also on the front page of the Sunday Express as well. They've zoomed in a bit to show just how close the fireball got to some buildings. I mean, you don't know if that's the photo, do you, Kunal? Kind of suggesting it was close, but look, you know, it landed on a road, it crashed on a road.
On a busy weekend as well. I mean, it's extremely tragic, and the fact that the pilot has survived, but there is in intensive care, and they think that there are more bodies to be discovered as well. So it's it's extremely shocking, and I find these pictures extremely graphic, actually, to put on the front page. But it does actually bring to light. I mean, we were talking earlier about how traumatic this must have been for people to have been watching.
Do you think that's where the papers will go, though? Do you think over the coming days some of the papers will be suggesting what Sian's suggesting, that we need a review of airshow safety? Because we've got to put it into context. 7 in 7 years.
Yes,
fatal crashes.
But when the scale of it is as, I mean, the number dead is as large as this, I think you have to sort of look at the processes. And also there's sort of other fallout. You sort of think that spectators who've actually visualised this or have seen this will be actually probably quite severely traumatised by that. And that will have its own its own consequences as well.
I could tell that, you know, some of the eyewitnesses we're speaking to tonight were clearly, you know, still very much in shock and trying to get their head around it. And you know, it's children. There's a lot of children.
Some of them were children. I mean, there are eyewitness accounts here of mothers, you know, saying that it was only a few metres away, and their children were with them. And one mother said that suddenly the whole atmosphere turned from being something very festive to becoming something so sombre, and that, you know, they were trying to hide their children's eyes from what was happening.
Other stories being covered by the papers tomorrow include Jeremy Corbyn gracing our front pages most of the time at the moment. Just take us through the latest line, Kunal. This is clearly in reference to Corbynomics. Corbyn wins economists' backing for his radical plan, says the Observer.
Yes, so in sort of contrast to the stories that we have been hearing in the last couple of weeks, one of the big lines of attack on Corbyn is that his economic plans, which include renationalisation of railways, energy companies, this extremely different version of quantitative easing, which is basically printing money and rather than putting it into sort of private investments, actually putting it into public infrastructure or writing off government debt. It's come under extreme criticism because a lot of people haven't seen this sort of economic arguments made in sort of public space like this, let alone a potential future Labour leader. So what's happened here is rather than the usual chorus of condemnation, these are 40 leading economists, including a former advisor to the Bank of England, saying, hang on, give this a chance. Let's just look at these policies piece by piece. And actually, when you do, they're not actually quite as shocking as one might think. And it's about time that this debate is had, because we're so close now to finding out who that Labour leader is, as we will in early September, that this is the last bit of the debate that needs to be had. And, you know, good on them, I say, for at least making this
I
argument.
wonder if Jeremy Corbyn will end up in Andy Burnham's shadow cabinet.
He said he will.
Ed Miliband could also end up on his shadow cabinet if Mr Burnham wins the election. Sian, this is an interview, isn't it, that he's done with The Independent on Sunday?
Yes, and he's saying that Andy Burnham is saying that Ed Miliband could make a return to politics, that Andy Burnham, would welcome him back into his team if Andy Burnham wins. With or without beard? Well, actually, Andy Burnham was a little shocked that Ed Miliband had a beard. He hadn't sort of caught up with that somehow. But he turned to his advisor when he was told that Ed Miliband now had a beard, and he gasped and he said, "What, Ed M? How have I missed that?" But then he sort of said, "Well, actually, I quite like it," when he was shown the photos. But yeah, I mean, we were talking about this earlier. We kind of think, although, you know, Jeremy Corbyn has very much been in the lead for this race, we think he's going to get pipped at the post, don't we?
Yeah, well, I just don't want to give too much credibility to the polls after the election. I think it's... Do
you think we've learnt more about Jeremy Corbyn than the other leaders, though, because he attracts, sometimes, as you say, for all the wrong reasons, attracts most of the headlines? He makes the most interesting read, and for guys like you, the most interesting writer.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, we didn't know anything about Jeremy Corbyn. Other, you know, people who've long attended the sort of Stop the War marches over the years know this man very well. He's sort of shared platforms on various you know, anti-war coalitions and things like that.
So many Labour ministers and members backed him just to create a debate, didn't they? Not necessarily to see him as leader, but they thought, well, let's make the debate more dynamic.
But what is interesting about the coverage now is seeing sort of, you know, the top sort of political correspondents now engaging with what he has to say. And I have to say, I've found that part of this debate much more interesting than the other three candidates who we know enough. What we've seen, probably the exception of Liz Kendall, but we've seen Andy Burnham and Yvette Cooper in shadow cabinets, in government. We pretty much know what they stand for. I think Jeremy Corbyn is just the eccentricity, the boldness of his campaign and his conviction has been absolutely immense to watch.
Now, Sian, in the Sunday Telegraph, the NHS staff under more scrutiny over their relationships with the drug companies declare freebies or face jail is the headline. Yes, and this is an interesting story, and it goes back to this idea that the big drug companies often offer gifts, hospitality, free trips to senior managers in the NHS or to senior doctors, and the suggestion is that that might be a sort of bribe to take their particular drug, or, you know, because obviously commissioning these drugs is massive business. There's a lot of pitching, isn't there, and a lot of pitching. And I mean, I've got some friends who are doctors, and you know, they're wined and dined, or you know, they're offered fantastic dinners and things regularly. But I think there's going to be a register of freebies, is what this story is saying, from drug companies, and quite severe penalties. I mean, senior doctors and managers will have to declare all gifts and hospitality from next year, and they could face the sack, or they could even face a jail sentence if they're found to be in breach of these guidelines, which I think is a really good thing. £7 billion of drugs aboard a year by the NHS in England.
It's a staggering amount of money, and I think for too long, I'm the same. I've had family and friends who are doctors, and seeing the way that certainly, like back in the 80s and 90s, the way this used to go on, you know, completely. We don't know because we see doctors at the point of purchase, effectively, so we don't see what's actually gone on behind the scenes. But the amount of
there's no suggestion it's bribery.
It's not bribery. No, absolutely not. It's relationships that you cultivate with drug companies, and they have every right as a sales pitch to, you know, to take you out. No different, I suppose, as to any corporate hospitality. But there's always a fine line, isn't it? And when it's public money,
I mean,
and
it's
in the
quite
NHS.
close to bribery, though, isn't it? I mean, I think that is sort of.
I don't know. It's as you say, it's wining and dining. It's building relationships. It's how people do business. It is business, isn't it?
Yeah.
A lot of business people meet up and wine and dine to do business. I mean, there's no suggestion that it's bribery, but it's clearly sitting very uncomfortably with a lot of people. Let's move on to the Mail on Sunday. What do you make of this front page, Sian? Face of a hero, face of a coward. It is the tale of two Britons, isn't it?
It's a very, very clever front page, isn't it? So on the one hand, you've got Chris Norman, the Briton who helped overpower this gunman on the train on Friday night. And on the other hand, you've got Jihadi John, Mohammed Emwazi, the Londoner, who has been the face of these dreadful execution videos that we have been seeing. And the very graphic headline, Face of a Hero, Face of a Coward. And the Mail on Sunday has actually got a video clip of Jihadi John unmasked.
Is there more than 9 seconds online?
They say it's a 1 minute 17 video in total, but online they've only got the 9 seconds.
We've only found 9 seconds of it, haven't we? But it's clear. It looks very cold where he is as well, and as you can see in the photo, he's wrapped up.
Yes, so we've looked at it. It seems to be they are of the mindset that it was filmed in southeastern Syria, a place called Deir Azor, 2 months ago. And the suggestion is that Jihadi John or Mohammed Emwazi, as we should refer to him as, Mohammed Emwazi has basically said that he wants to come back to Britain and cut off heads, which is basically ISIS propaganda, absolutely happening again.
Yeah, and the video apparently was passed to a member of the Free Syrian Army, and that's how it got to the media.
One thing I have wondered is, since we identified Mohammed Emwazi, he seems to have completely disappeared off the news, or just his whereabouts have been completely unknown. He was sort of described as a man on the run. And the thing about this story that is interesting is that, we're sort of quietly closing in on his whereabouts. I mean, this sort of feels like the prelude to, you can't sort of stay in Syria forever.
Sounds like it makes you a little bit uncomfortable giving too much attention to Islamic State.
Yeah, I mean, having worked on a lot of these stories in the last year, I do now, I mean, we all do on national newspapers, I think, really treat it with a lot of scepticism, aware that, ISIS do have a very sophisticated propaganda campaign that we want to.
Kunal, Sian, many thanks for taking us through the papers this evening. We'll do it again soon. Thank you to you as well for joining us for the papers. Coming up next on BBC News, it's the film review. Don't go away.